So with 40K's balanced data slate handing out some rather big buffs and nerfs, it does seem that it might be the Necrons' time to shine in the competitive game, teaching the upstart races of the galaxy who's boss. Let's talk about our new robot overlords. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought it would be worth taking a video to explore Necrons, who perhaps seem to be billed as the single strongest army of Warhammer 40k going into the future. Let's talk through the changes of the balanced data slate and how it looks like it's hugely good news for them there, then talk through the strong options of the army and what you might have on the other side of the tabletop when the Tomb Worlds unleash their wrath. First up, I just thought from tournament data it could be interesting to take a look at the positioning of Necrons relative to some of the other top armies in Warhammer 40k, and then the changes that happened in the data slate. I know tournament win rate absolutely isn't everything, though I think it is a good rough and ready metric for roughly how strong a faction is in-game, and a metric that Necrons basically seem to be winning at really quite well. Prior to the data slate, the new Necron Codex from December had a win rate kind of similar to Eldari, somewhere around the 56 to 58% sort of mark, even if they hadn't been out all that long. The Necrons were definitely taking down a number of top spots and podium places at events as well, including notably winning the Las Vegas Open, the biggest event of Warhammer 40k 10th edition, coming just before the so-called balance update. The Eldari was certainly one of the other strongest factions out there though, and beyond that, for competition, the Chaos Space Marines had a win rate of around about 55 to 56%, notably doing very well at higher levels of play though, with the exact right list taking down a lot of big tournaments. And other more powerful armies out there included things like Leaguers of Votann, Black Templars, and World Eaters, maybe Chaos Knights, Death Guard, and Orcs following that up, all nosing into win rates over 50%. Basically, the upshot was, though, that Necrons looked like they were one of the very strongest factions of Warhammer 40k before the data slate, giving Eldari a run for their money, and certainly looking a little bit ahead of most of their other rivals nearby. As we know, though, Games Workshop had the January balanced data slate, and in that they decided to make a number of big changes to plenty of the other factions out there, though Necrons and AdMech got literally nothing, I guess due to their codexes coming out in December, and Games Workshop deciding not to make any rapid-fire updates to them, even if to me it seemed kind of clear the way that the wind was blowing with those two codexes. Eldari got around about 5 rules nerfs and a couple of points hits as well, though even with that I don't think that they're out of the running and still look like a strong army overall. The Chaos Space Marines I think fared worse, lots of points increases and lots of rules nerfs to their strongest stratagems and combos. Basically everything that they had that was being run competitively consistently did get small hits, maybe more so than the Eldari. Otherwise, Leagues of Votann were a little bit below them, but got some choice increases to their best units, quite impactful when they don't have that much of a unit roster to start with. The World Eaters were hit with surprisingly punitive nerfs, considering they were a little bit below some of the rest, and the Black Templars got some small noses to their unique stuff, but I think actually might be just as much affected by things like Inceptors and Scouts going up, which were staples in most Space Marine army lists. The mid-tier armies in 40k, I don't think I'd really rate them as coming out overall stronger out of the update, at least for most of them. And only some of the lowest tier armies in the game like Drukhari, Custodes and Knights got some serious rules increases. Out of these, perhaps only Drukhari and Custodes rising to the extent where they're going to be seriously threatening tournaments, I think. Maybe Drukhari could genuinely be in contention for one of the stronger factions in the game now, after their big detachment rules update and lots of points cuts. Overall though, between all that, it just seems kind of hard to imagine how Necrons won't be beating down the competition just by the stats game. They've had the vast majority of their nearest rivals heavily nerfed, they've come through entirely unscathed despite being easily on their level before, and it doesn't really look like anything from the mid or lower tier of 40k is going to rise up to the extent where it's going to be seriously threatening their dominance. My guess is that if Games Workshop don't pull out some sort of emergency balance patch for AdMech and Necron sometime soon, the next 3 months or so until the next update are going to be looking very good for these Tomb World dynasties. Just rattling through a few of the major sources of Necron strength, I feel like perhaps the first and foremost one to mention are the Catan shards. I'd personally rate these as pushing for the single most undercosted unit in Warhammer 40k, just immense stats in terms of damage and defense. The Nightbringer and the Void Dragon seem to be the most commonly played, and I'm not surprised. Melee damage that can threaten the nastiest things in the game and threaten it well. Some helpful range damage and powers of the Catan, but most importantly just staggering durability. 12 wounds at toughness 11 with half damage and a 5+ feel no pain. Their only real weakness is movement, which can be got around with the Hypercrypt formation. But even so, still moving 6 inches isn't a death sentence for a model with just this much strength. Just move them towards a midfield objective and they're going to cause problems. The Nightbringer I think is just ludicrous for 255 points. Massive melee damage at strength 14, AP 4 and damage d6 plus 2, a good shooting attack and some bonus mortal wounds. Though the durability is really the standout thing. He could eat half an army's shooting and come out smiling, and then with living metal be healing d3 of those wounds per turn when the wounds are so hard to take down in the first place. The Void Dragon I think is kind of similar utility. 270 points, again for just immense stats. His combat profile is good against basically everything, particularly having lots of things that can hit lighter infantry. Though he does have his specialty in ruining enemy vehicles, so he's going to be a little bit more matchup dependent. Though I think in just about any matchup he's not going to be wasted. The Transcendent Catan is still great for just teleporting up to the front lines, and again kind of getting around the whole Catan movement issues. And the Deceiver is probably the least played out of the bunch of them, though again definitely isn't terrible given his redeploys, and stealth for a -1 to hit makes him the hardest Catan to kill at long range. Really not too sure what Games Workshop was thinking, making already playable models have a 5+ feel no pain save and not upping the points cost at all. If they did want to make some sort of balance adjustment, I feel like the Catan could go up considerably and still be absolutely great models for the cost. I feel like when you occasionally see people theorising lists that contain, say, 6 Catan and a few support things, you kind of know that they've got the balance wrong on them. I feel like they're strong in any formation, though the Catan might be particularly stand out in the Hypercrypt Legion, the one that was kind of notable for topping the Las Vegas Open. And out of the competitive Necron detachments, it seems to be this and the Canoptek Court that are most played, the Hypercrypt perhaps gaining a little bit more notoriety after winning the big event. Its core rule is allowing you to take a bunch of units off the board at the end of the enemy turn, sort of Grey Knight style. If they've got Deep Strike, they can return anywhere next turn. If they don't, then they can turn up at the edge of the board, which is still solid redeployment for shooting units. We could do things with Monolith to bring them in on the Eternity Gate, and they have that amazing Cosmic Precision stratagem, allowing you to deploy units from the Hyperphase anywhere that's greater than 3 inches from the enemy. That's absolutely scary if you've got a Nightbringer or Void Dragon to land behind enemy lines. The enhancements are pretty good as well, getting you reroll hits from Hyperphase, and a built-in Deep Strike one, which could be handy for teleporting Locust Destroyers or Mortals around to deal damage. It is kind of fun that this one makes the Monolith viable as well, as seen to great effect with the LVO, though even then not every single Hypercrypt list tends to use one. As mentioned for encouraged units for this one, all the Katana helped out loads by this. The Monolith can both make use of deep striking rules itself, and also be a great bastion for doing movement shenanigans with your other units. Range things like Locust Destroyers, Heavy Destroyers, the Doomsday Ark, Death Marks or Immortals will all like it. Death Marks can be quite nice for doing secondary objectives, though ideally you'd probably still want at least some tough stuff on the board to hold objectives for things that aren't doing hyperphase things all over the place. Having just a couple of solid anchor units could help. In any case, it's just kind of powerful to get these sort of movement shenanigans on units that have got very impactful damage and maybe aren't really costed for it in the same way that Grey Knights are. And it's a particularly powerful army for doing secondary objectives, where you can usually guarantee that you've got the units to redeploy in right positions of the board, particularly with Cosmic Precision. I must admit it is kind of fun to see the Monolith getting played in these lists. I'd say it's probably not the sort of thing that really needs changing in terms of points or anything out of the Necron army. I'd argue it's pretty fairly costed for 350 points, but definitely adds a lot of strength to that formation. It is very tough at 22 wounds, toughness 13 and a 2+ save, with access to a few big movement tricks such as saving enemy squads elsewhere on the board, plus the ability to flex into a 4+ invulnerable save if you do get hit by something with extra high AP. Otherwise it is just quite nice and general purpose. The Particle Whip and 4 Death Rays are very scary. It's not even worthless in melee given the Portal of Exile, and being able to arrive Necrons from reserves next to it can give you another choice for how you get your hyperphasing units onto the board from safety. Otherwise, the other big tournament-winning Necron formation is the Canoptek Court. Again, lots of people are having plenty of success with this list. The core rule being the establishment of a power matrix. You get it in your deployment zone, then you need to hold half or more of the midfield objectives, something that isn't really hard to do given that the rule is checked after your movement phase. So if you moved units onto the midfield objectives in your movement, then you could have the mid-board in your power matrix for the shooting phase and get some juicy rerolls. If a Cryptek or Canoptek unit is within the power matrix, you get to reroll all hits, and that's massive on just any unit with those keywords, whether it's Immortals, Doomstalkers, Wraiths or more. The stratagems and enhancements for that do seem extra nice, perhaps particularly infiltrating a big block of Wraiths with Dimensional Sanctum, and there's choices for reactive moves for Canoptek creations, plus the ability to hide from shooting at greater than 12 inches, which is very disruptive for enemy shooting. I'd argue that most of the stratagems and enhancements are really quite usable. They did pick up the nerf in the Necron FAQ though, saying that the Tesla Immortals can no longer use the Devastating Wounds stratagem, as that one was being used to just blitz enemy units right off objectives with mass devastating wounds, and seems that Games Workshop weren't really intending that interaction apparently. I feel like that did influence the strength of the detachment, but seemingly not so much that it's not competitive. For most encouraged units here, Wraiths and Technomancers are great anywhere, but they're massive here given the hit rerolls and the cool stratagem support. Having one block of these infiltrating forward seems absolutely auto-include here. Doomstalkers go from kind of okay to genuinely great shooting here. Immortals with Plasmancers are still excellent, and even if they're not throwing out devastating wounds, they're still very cheap and effective ways to stack mass saves on the enemy. And of course, just about anything else with the Canoptek keyword is better here. Scarabs and Spiders will both get better value. In Necron lists, it seems like the choice is between the Canoptek Court just for raw power with damage and defense, or having a detachment that can do the movement tricks to jump over the board doing secondary objectives, set up shooting where needed, or get Catan where they need to be early. Focusing in on other Necron staple units, the Canoptek Wraiths again seem to be a unit that is just very hard to go wrong with. They got boosted to 4 wounds in the Codex, and for 110 points for a squad of 3 of them, they're just good value for 12 wounds worth of toughness 6 with a 4+ invulnerable save. And their damage output is quite good for battling down against midfield units between their particle casters for some devastating wound shooting and their vicious claws for a bunch of damage to melee. They're not going to be soloing the biggest and baddest threats against the enemy army, but they will chip damage off literally anything, and are usually hard enough to take a bit of a strike back. If you're taking a big squad of 6 of them, the Technomancer is well worth it. He's 60 points and gives them a 5+ feel no pain type save, which really takes their durability from good to great. He doesn't add a massive amount of combat threat in his own way, but he does give the squad the option to bear enhancements like that Dimensional Sanctum for setting up in the midfield. Having a big block of Wraiths just first turn charge, something that's really important to the enemy, could be enormously problematic, and even comes with a built-in healing rule. He can heal one of the Wraiths D3, and between that and reanimation protocols, it might make for the Wraith standing up even once the opponent has killed them. Otherwise, for perhaps one of the other most consistently played Necron units are the Immortals right now, often fielded in 140 points per 10 of them. That gives you 10 guys with toughness 5 and a 3+ save, and it does seem that both Gauss and Tesla are played, Gauss with lethal hits and a bit of extra AP, Tesla with sustained hits 2 and just stacks mass saves at AP 0. Now that Necron Warriors got nerfed quite as much as they did, they do seem to be the core battle line choice for the army, and the one that people build around with combos and character support. They do have that particularly interesting rule where they get to fully reroll the wound roll whenever they target an enemy on an objective, which is really quite big for stacking saves. They're pretty much good with most of the Necron support choices. The Overlord with a Translocation Shroud can be good for fast run and gun Tesla carbines. The Plasmancer's pretty excellent for getting sustained hits on a 5+ and adding his own damage output, and they work really well with Illuminor Seraz as well with his AP manipulation, potentially making both their shooting better and their toughness greater as well. Otherwise, besides all that, while there's definitely some underpowered stuff in the Necron's Codex, there's plenty of other good stuff too. I'd say that their anti-tank damage dealers with Locust Heavy Destroyers, Doomsday Arcs, and Doomstalkers are all playable if you just want some big guns to destroy enemy tanks from the backfield. I feel like perhaps people are leaning more towards Catan to do the heavy lifting with that sort of role at the moment, though having a little bit of long-range firepower that can threaten tanks really isn't the worst thing to include. Doomstalkers do seem pretty fun in Canoptek Court. You could usually guarantee that they get the rerolls by just sitting in your deployment zone, even if you can't maintain the power matrix in the midboard for some reason. Otherwise, Locust Destroyers are commonly played, often just in individual units of 1 for board control with a unit that still has good damage. You could potentially build big units of those, and they're kind of fun in Hypercrypt for warping around the board and getting those Gauss cannons in range. Getting the combo of full hit rerolls and lethal hits on a 5+ with a Destroyer Lord does make them frighteningly general purpose. Otherwise, small numbers of objective scorers are handy to have. Scarabs can do secondaries, Deathmarks can deep strike for secondaries, Tombblades have great movement with their move shoot move, and Flayed Ones could be interesting to set up in the midboard if you did just want a screening unit to make sure the enemy doesn't get the jump on you there. They'd perhaps be second choice to the Infiltrating Wraith in Canoptek Court though. Otherwise for HQs, most of the Cryptechs are really quite playable. Plasmancers are excellent with Immortals as mentioned, and Chronomancers are really interesting as well with their move shoot move, means that you can have units that can jump quite a long way, or do weird things like move after hyperphasing, potentially reaching bits of the board that are kind of theoretically well screened. Overlords are solid for their free stratagems, though it does kind of depend on the detachment for that. The Translocation Shroud one is nice for a bit of extra mobility. Imitate the Stormlord can spit out a whole bunch more CP, not bad when you've got some powerful stratagems from Hypercrypt or from the Canoptek Court. As mentioned, Illuminor Seraz is really interesting at his new points cost, excellent to be running alongside the Immortals, and just for his base profile, he's certainly good at combating himself, a whole bunch of damage 3 attacks at range and melee. Putting that all together, here are just a couple of Necron army lists. Here's the Las Vegas Open winning Necrons by Matt Laura. This one using the Hypercrypt Legion and a really good balance of Necron good stuff. It does seem that people have been emulating or even directly copying this list in events later on. There's 30 Immortals with a mix of Gauss and Tesla. I guess the Gauss probably goes with the Chronomancers and the Plasma with the Tesla. That one can allow some 4 rerolls to hit and wound potentially with exploding hits on 5. One of the Chronomancers has the Deep Strike enhancement, so one of the squads can go anywhere on the board each turn. Otherwise, in one of the units there's Imitate the Stormlord farming his CP, Illuminor Seraz to do AP things with the Immortal Phalanx, and for objective and screening support there's 2 units of 3 Scarabs, 1 unit of Death Marks, and 3 individual Locust Destroyers. Having cheap units like those around could be pretty handy for just throwing where you need them to get secondaries. Then for the 3 heavy lifters, there's the Nightbringer and the Void Dragon, great in any list and excellent if you can get them closer to the enemy fast as you can with Hypercrypt, and a big imposing Monolith with the Death Rays. Interesting for some good tricks with the Immortals warping back to it potentially, but also notably used in the final of the Las Vegas Open with a big teleport play to take out a bunch of the Eldari army. It did have a bit of luck with making some saves, but I think even if it had died, there'd be a good chance it would have been a Necron victory anyway. Overall, really quite a scary list, and it is kind of nice to have a really quite big mix of units here, including seeing a Monolith do well in competitive play for once, which has been very unusual until very recently. It does feel like it's quite a nicely balanced one with some phalanxes of infantry, some Catan in support, and the big Monolith and some cool characters. Otherwise, for an example of an army list I talked about earlier in the week on the channel, here's a Canoptek Court list by Willow, who used this to take second at a GT in France. This one looks like a very honed and scary Canoptek Court creation one. 3 Technomancers leading up 3 units of 6 Wraiths, so just enormously durable threats to deal with there. One of them takes the Sanctum to allow them to deploy in the midfield, and they're just solid units for taking objectives and mauling anything that doesn't have a 2+ save or excessively high toughness. Otherwise, there's a unit of Scarab Swarms, 3 individual Locust Destroyers, 1 unit of Tomb Blades, and a Canoptek Doomstalker. I guess that could be an interesting one to hold a home field objective, seeing as you can hide it from shooting when you need to. This one goes even heavier on the Catan shards though, a Nightbringer and a Void Dragon also joined by a Transcendent Catan. Perhaps that one's ability to jump right to the front line might be even more useful in one that can't teleport things normally. Again, very very scary. Armies even with a bunch of damage output might really struggle to kill any one of those 6 enormously durable things between the Wraiths and the Catan shards. Overall, I feel like Necrons are in a good position to be dominating the competition for a while, getting big wins before, and only having a few armies really meaningfully buffed to try and rise up to rival them. So I feel like until the next balanced data slate, we're going to be seeing an awful lot of them at the tops of big events. I feel like when Games Workshop do eventually get round to looking at balance for the army, a nerf to Catan seems like the most obvious thing to do, just given that they'd still be exciting and powerful models to play even if they went up in points a bit, as they're both dangerous and ridiculously durable. I feel like that will be probably the most sensible thing to change first, and maybe also boost a few things that are struggling more, like say Necron Warriors, which are kind of sad to have so far behind the Immortals. Otherwise, for options on trying to rein them in a little bit, small increases on Immortals or Wraiths might not be the end of the world for them, though I feel like perhaps the Catan are the most obviously problematic of the models. In any case though, let me know what you think. I'll be interested to hear any insights from other Necron players or people who've faced against them recently. Look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.